Hello, Internet. I am Pastor Recoil, and welcome to my parish. Today is the 11th Sunday after Pentecost, and we're going to talk about it. Welcome to Pastor Recoil's Parish, where I talk about some things you may not have heard about in church, either because it's not quite appropriate for all audiences, or it just isn't something that's easy to talk about in a sermon. Before we get started today, I want to note that I'm going to start using a different translation of the Bible from now on. I had been using the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, which is quite a mouthful, but it's also a great scholarly translation and very good using the latest of Bible study things to make this translation. But I'm switching to the Common English Bible, which I think I've used in the past, in large part because that translation makes more sense in modern English. The CEB was designed to be read aloud and to sound right to modern ears, and that goal seems a lot more in line with what I'm hoping to do with this channel. So, that out of the way, the readings for the 11th Sunday after Pentecost are Genesis 37, 1 through 4 and 12 through 28, Psalm 105, 1 through 6, 16 through 22 and the second half of 45, Romans 10, 5 through 15, and Matthew 14, 22 through 33. We're going to talk about a time that sibling rivalry got a bit out of control. I'd imagine most of us are familiar with the story of Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. Never mind that the story's not really about Joseph, and he probably didn't have a multicolored coat, but that's neither here nor there. Between the Bible story and the popular musical adaptation, it's the story of Joseph's triumph in the face of his jealous brothers and their reconciliation many years later. But the story isn't quite so simple or straightforward. Joseph is his father Jacob's favorite son, and everyone, especially Joseph, seems to know this. Jacob gave Joseph an incredibly fancy robe, one with long sleeves, indicating that Joseph didn't need to work like the rest of his brothers. That's the word that gets translated as many colors, but probably just means it has long sleeves. This obvious favoritism, combined with Joseph being more than a little bit of a tattletale, really irritated Joseph's brothers. They were so mad that they couldn't even say hello to him. The scripture says they couldn't speak peace to him or speak peaceably to him, but peace is the standard greeting. They couldn't even say hi. But then Joseph made things even worse. He had these dreams in which his brother and even his father and mother would bow down before him. Now, Joseph, is brother like 11 out of 12? Even though he's Jacob's favorite, that's really low on the brotherly importance list. So his brothers get pissed. Now one day, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers and his father's sheep out in the wilderness. Now, this tells you how little work Joseph actually does, because he should have been with the brothers tending the sheep. But Joseph has a bit of a hard time finding them, an indication about just how far out in the wilderness they are. And when the brothers see Joseph, they collectively have an idea. Here comes the big dreamer, they say. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns, and we'll say a wild animal devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Now, one of the brothers, the eldest, Reuben, says, let's not kill him. Don't spill his blood. Instead, throw him into the cistern, but don't lay a hand on him, because he intended to save Joseph from them and take him back to his father. So Joseph gets to the brothers, and they ditch him into the cistern. They sit down for lunch, and they see in the distance some Ishmaelites, descendants of their great uncle, and another brother, Judah, says, well, we could kill him, but we could also sell him, and there's money in selling someone. So they sell him to the Ishmaelites. Then Midianite traders come by and they sell Joseph to them. Reuben comes back and is distraught because he was going to bring Joseph back to their father to win some bonus points. So all the brothers slaughter a goat, dip Joseph's robe in the blood of the goat, and go back and tell Jacob, "We found this. See if it's your son's robe or not." Jacob recognizes the robe and decides that Joseph was eaten by a wild animal, letting his brothers off the hook of lying to their father because they didn't say he was murdered, they just showed him the coat. And Jacob mourns his son for many days. Meanwhile, Joseph gets sold to the commander of Egypt's royal guard, and the chapter, but not Joseph's or really the rest of the brothers' story, ends. Now, we need to be honest here. This is a terrible story. There's no moral to it besides don't be like these jerks. We don't need to find a moral in every single Bible story. But it does highlight some interesting textual stuff that happens in the background of reading the Bible that we don't really see very often. And that stuff tells us about where these texts in the Hebrew scriptures came from and how we might have gotten them. See, you might have noticed as we read this story that there were a couple things that don't exactly make sense. For instance, we have two brothers with two different plans for saving Joseph's life. Reuben wants to take him back to Jacob. Judah wants to sell him to some traders. Meanwhile, there's two traders. In one section, they're called Ishmaelites, and in another, they're called Midianites. The Midianites aren't descendants of their great uncle Ishmael, but descendants of their great uncle Midian, one of Abraham's descendants from his third wife. Even more confusing, sometimes Jacob is called Jacob, other times Jacob is called Israel, and it's almost like there are two stories that got mashed together side by side. Well, the reason why it seems like there's two stories that got mashed together is because that's exactly what happened. One story originated from the southern kingdom of Judah in Iron Age Israel. For reasons that I hope are obvious, they want to focus on Jacob's son, Judah, and the things that Judah does, because that is the founder of their particular tribe. This is the account that tends to call God by God's personal name, the Tetragrammaton that usually gets translated as Lord, and they use the name Israel for Jacob. This is the version that includes the Ishmaelite detail. But the other version of the story is a bit different. It largely uses the word Elohim for God, rather just kind of a generic term rather than God's personal name. This version comes from the northern kingdom of Samaria, one in which Reuben, as the eldest and part of that group, played a prominent role. Jacob's original name of Jacob is used most often here, and it's the Midianites who buy Joseph and sell him to the Egyptians. The issues of combining these sources comes up quite a bit in the Hebrew scriptures. And depending on what theory you follow, there are anywhere between 2 and maybe a dozen separate accounts that get mashed together to create the first 5 books of the Hebrew scripture especially. This is why when we read these stories, they seem almost jumbled and out of place. The stories were compiled together with the goal of keeping as much information as possible, so that no one group's favorite stories get left out. And in doing so, they kept all of that information, especially when it was contradictory information. Now, there's a lot in history on why these texts got mashed together in the first place, but I'm not really going to talk about that today. But stories like these do tell us about the formation of the texts that we have, as we see the clues in how these stories are told in past versions of these stories. Knowing this history helps us to understand what these stories meant to the people who originally told them, which in turn helps us to better understand what to do with them today. But it means we have to view these works as products of their time. We can't just read them literally hoping to find meaning for us. There needs to be nuance as we sort through the mess that we have in a lot of these texts, due to their composition and compiling over centuries. But when we do that, we get to see the beauty in the mess and get insights into the text that we otherwise wouldn't, because we encounter the text for what it is and not what we wish it could be. So if you want to see more content like this, check out the links to my right or click on the logo below my face to subscribe so you'll know when my next video comes out. Thank you for watching, and take the time this week to love your neighbor as yourself, especially if you don't like them all that much.